or you can put them in the Q&A portion. Okay, Cameron, take it away.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your busy Thursday to join me today in this podcast 101, how to start a successful podcast in 2021. As Kelly mentioned earlier, my name is Cameryn Hodges. I'm currently a culture initiatives intern for Disney branded television. And I've just had the best experience learning and developing into a better me, a better version of myself, not just with leading these workshops, but getting this experience as an intern. And then as I complete my internship in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much again for coming out and joining me today. And let's just dive in. So we already did this earlier, but if you want, you can drop in the chat where you're tuning in from. We'd love to know. And then also to start off, drop in the chat, what is your favorite pastime activity? It can be watching TV, listening to a podcast, exercising, and we will go from there. All right. All right, we have someone from San Antonio, Texas, cooking. Hi, Zaire. She's tuned in from Atlanta. Photography, reading, running, hacking on code, gardening, photography, love photography, listening to music, cooking, love those, singing, reading, watching TV shows. Welcome from DC. Hi, Soror Cole. Thank you for joining. Hi from Orlando. Working out. Yes, we love to stay fit. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, but feel free to keep commenting in the chat. So welcome everyone. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Cameryn Hodges. I'm going to be a junior actually starting next Friday is my first day of classes at the University of Illinois at Springfield, and I'm a communications major there with a minor in visual arts. I am from Belleville, Illinois. I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and my favorite Disney character is Princess Tiana. And upon graduation, I plan to attend graduate school somewhere. And a little bit of my content creation experience before we dive in. I do have my own YouTube channel. It's called Cameryn Grace, and I do a lot of college and lifestyle content on there. Right now, I'm currently at about 2.4K subscribers, and I started my YouTube channel way back of December 2016 as a sophomore in high school, mainly just to document my life to look back on in the future, but it really has turned into a new side hobby and side hustle for me. And I've been doing that. This December will be 5 years of me being active on YouTube, creating content. And then I also run my own podcast. It's called Current Talk Podcast. It's available on Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you listen to your daily podcasts. And I do it with one of my best friends from college, Faith Metellus, and we talk all things college, lifestyle, and society. I am a co-host on there, and as of now, we have received over 1,700 downloads from over 27 countries. We have had over 30 guest speakers, and we started this podcast our freshman year of college, November 2019. So this upcoming November will be our second year doing this podcast, and it's just been the best experience doing it with a good friend from school. And then also when I have the time between college and my other content creation endeavors, I do have my own blog. It is called Cameryn Writes. It currently has over 300 subscriptions, and I started that a month after I started my podcast, December 2019. So here's a little bit about me, and let's just get into this podcast 101. And before we dive in, if you are interested, as Kelly mentioned earlier, I did lead a YouTube 101 workshop with Zaire Davis, a fellow intern, and I'll actually drop the link to this webinar in the chat at the end of this presentation if you want to learn more about social media and content creating. Alrighty, so Current Talk, here's a brief overview of Current Talk podcast. Over to the right, that is our current logo that we use across everything, our podcast episodes, our social media. This is how we kind of have branded ourselves. It's two, I want to say emoticons, or I want to say like cartoon characters of me and my co-host, kind of what we look like. Me on the left, kind of leaning, and my co-host Faith on the right. And then Current Talk, and then the podcast logo there. So as I said earlier, we started our podcast back of November 2019. We are two 20-year-old juniors in college that do a podcast together called Current Talk, where we do weekly episodes talking about society, pop culture, current events, and we occasionally have guests on there to interview, and we upload every Wednesday mornings. And a little analytics behind it, as I mentioned earlier, here's the stats and the pictures on the right, that's me, and then my co-host Faith. So a little bit more about specifically Current Talks. So we have listeners from all over the world, which we're very fortunate to say, and it's growing day by day. We do have a domestic and international audience, so I'll just go through really quick. Currently, we have listeners from 37 of the 50 states in the United States. So Illinois, Washington, Ohio, California, Alabama, Texas, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Tennessee, Wyoming, Wisconsin, Utah, New York, Georgia, Florida, Virginia, Missouri, Arizona, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Jersey, North Carolina, Oregon, Minnesota, Maryland, West Virginia, Colorado, Idaho, Kansas, Indiana, New Hampshire, Louisiana, DC, Arkansas, Hawaii, Kentucky, and Connecticut, which I honestly, every time I look at our analytics, I am just overall astonished and just surprised that this is the audience that we broadcast to on a weekly basis. And I'm just very blessed that we have this very supportive community that we create content for. And here are all of the countries that we currently broadcast to. We have listeners from New Zealand, the Philippines, Singapore, Canada, Hungary, India, the UK. I'm not gonna mention all of them, but this is just an overview, and these are actually screenshots of my Current Talk dashboard that me and my co-hosts have access to, that is live analytics that we see come in all the time, every week. And this is the current stats right now. So just giving you guys a little bit of the behind the scenes of our podcast and our listeners and where they're from. And again, at the end of the day, I'm so blessed to have this audience and to have this supportive community, and it's constantly growing, and I can't wait to see where it goes in the future. And then all the listening platforms. So majority of our listeners do listen from Apple Podcasts on their phone. We do have some Spotify listeners, as well as Overcast and Anchor, which is our podcast distributor, which I'll get into more in a little bit about teaching guys how you guys can also get started. And then about 30% of our other listeners are using other platforms, maybe Google or Breaker, just other streaming platforms to listen to our podcast. And again, this is live analytics from our podcast dashboard straight from the source. And then because Faith and I are both women, African-American women in today's world, 88% of our audience are female, but we do have male, and a couple of non-binary genders that tune into our podcast. And then age, also Faith and I are college students. We're about in our early 20s. So most of our audience are between the ages of 18 to 22, but we do have more of the young adults slash going into middle-aged adult audience there. So that's a little bit of our audience age-wise. And so, yeah, that's a bit of a big overview of Current Talk. So now we're going to dive into how you guys can also start your own podcast. And these, I think, are the 6 essential steps to starting one. So let's just get started. So first off, planning a podcast. So if you are sitting here today and you're saying, Cameryn, I'm really, really eager, I want to start a podcast. So here is planning your podcast. So first, ask yourself this question: why am I making a podcast? Is it to express yourself? Are you looking for a new side hobby slash side hustle? If you are also a YouTuber or content creator, do you want to have another avenue to repurpose your content creation experience or repurpose your brand? Do you want to explore a passion? Do you want to share expertise on a topic or industry? So if you are a teacher, or if you are just really knowledgeable about a certain topic that you could think you can educate and inform your community about, You can support your community, and then just to have fun and be creative. Back when I started my podcast with Faith, we just honestly wanted to just talk about our opinions on different topics and just have fun with it and just to try something new. So if that's also up in your alley, definitely do that. And then are you going to go solo? Or are you going to have a co-host? Both avenues are both perfectly fine. I do say having a co-host is a lot more fun just because when it comes to just overall managing your podcast as a business and just continuing to grow it, you have that person that is your ride or die. You can go to them for anything, and just overall your second cheerleader, so you're not always by yourself. But I am a big fan of a lot of my favorite podcasts are actually solo. So if you want to start a podcast by yourself, that's perfectly fine too. And then what is your content schedule? I know starting a podcast may not be a full-time avenue option for everyone, but if you want to stay consistent, find a specific day of the week that you can dedicate to recording, editing, and then posting it. And then that will just keep you on track. And overall, as you're building your portfolio with your episodes, it'll make it more marketable and more professional at the end of the day. So definitely keep that in mind. So next, for step 2, we're going to get into talking about equipment. To start off, it is perfectly fine to use an iPhone to record your podcast episodes as your microphone. I know on iPhone specifically, there's the voice memos app. When me and my co-host started out, we used our iPhones, but we now have invested into actual studio microphones that we use and studio headphones that we use just to have that better quality when recording and then listening back to the episode. But just to start off, an iPhone is perfectly fine. And then recording softwares, you can use Zoom, but I wouldn't recommend using it just because Zoom can have buffering issues, and that can come into affecting when you do start to edit your podcast. I do recommend Zencastr though. If you were to just go to zencastr.com, to start off, there are plans from free to $20 a month, and it allows you to record your video and audio with guests, and then it will allow you to download it straight to your computer when you're done, and then edit and upload it all by yourself. And then for step 3, recording your first episode. So I highly recommend that you do write out a script. It is very easy to ramble, to have pauses, and those all are very kind of hard to edit out when you do come down to editing and distributing your podcast. So definitely have a script ready to go. And within your script, have a brief introduction about your podcast, what you're about, who is in the podcast, so introducing co-hosts, and then if you have a guest on that episode, introduce the guest, and then have your topic of the episode, so whatever you're going to talk about. Have any call to actions. This can be sure to check us out on social media if you are at the point with your podcast where you have sponsorships and you have to shout out a brand. This is also the time to put that in. And just this is your time to also just market yourself and to lead your listeners to other avenues after they're done listening to your episode. And then a brief closing, thank them for their time, for listening to your content and your support. And then that is your brief script there. And then for also within recording your first episode, have a nice small area that you're going to record your podcast. To start out, you do not need a professional studio. It can easily be a small room like a closet or a bedroom. Add furniture like a couch or bookcases to limit echoes and just different vibrations within air conditioning that will cancel out for recording your episode. And for step 4, editing and producing your podcast episodes. So you can add music, you can add different sound effects, different intros and outros. I recommend Syncly, synclymusic.com, and it is a pay per track business. So you just go onto the website and you pick out a truck that you want and you just pay for it. You don't have to sign up for a subscription or anything like that. And it's all copyright free. So you won't, if you do get to a point where your podcast is monetized, you won't have any type of monetary strikes or anything like that. And then for editing, definitely look for dead gaps of dead air, cut out dead air and eliminate background noise as much as you can. And then when you're uploading it, upload it in an MP3 file. And then for when you're creating your cover art, you want to make sure it's bright, it's engaging, it drives people in, because at the end of the day, that is what the first thing people are going to see before they listen to your episode is the description and the cover art. And Canva is definitely an awesome option to do that. It's free. You can go to canva.com and sign up with your email, and then you'll have access to literally thousands of different layouts, graphics, text to create your cover art. And when you upload it, you'll upload it as a JPEG or PNG file to your MacBook or PC or wherever you're editing your podcast episode. And now for step 5, how do you publish your podcast? You're ready to go, you've recorded, you have your cover art ready. How to distribute it to the world? So Anchor, which is anchor.fm, the website, is the podcast distributor and podcast host that I use for my podcast, and I still use it. It's awesome because it automatically uploads your RSS feed, which is basically what allows your audience to listen to your podcast via different platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. And then for social media, I do recommend you create a separate Instagram account for your podcast, just so you're not spam posting anything on like your personal account. And if you do want to keep it strictly for business and keep your personal life out of it, you can definitely have a separate account for that, for any announcements or specific details within your podcast. And then if you want, you can also create your own website for that too, for anyone to get any live updates. And this is how Current Talk currently looks across all platforms via iPhones. So to the left, we have Apple Podcasts, we have Spotify right in the middle, and we have Google Podcasts on the far right. And I do say with Spotify, it's nice because you can actually see the cover art that you designed specifically for that episode. So the big Current Talk logo is like the logo that you see when you search for Current Talk. But as you can see, kind of at the bottom of the Spotify image where we have our episode that we did with Charles Yingling, you can kind of see the mini square image that was the actual cover art for the episode, which had his profile picture, Current Talk, the podcast logo, and then the description of the podcast and the title. But that is just overall what it will look like once you upload your episode to Anchor, and then it will distribute it all down the line to each platform, and it will do it automatically, so you don't have to push any buttons or any extra things like that. And then for your final step, launching and growing your podcast. So you've uploaded a couple episodes, and now you're asking yourself, how do you grow your audience? How do you reel people back in? So specifically for Current Talk, we upload a schedule. If we know a month ahead of time that we're going to have certain guests per month, we'll create like a little teaser to post on our Instagram story that says, this is March's schedule. This is who we're having on this day at this time. Be sure you tune in. And this can be an IG story or a post, regular standard post on social media. I highly recommend that you do release any episodes and just content in general in the mornings between 9 a.m. and 11 p.m., whatever your time zone is, just because that's right when people wake up. That's right when people wake up to look at their phone. So if you are more into really just looking into how people are operating and just looking at content, if you want to have more eyeballs on there, be sure it's up and ready to go right when people are scrolling through their phone looking for any updates. You then want to post your cover art and tag any guests, depending on your guest's notability or just well-known aspect of them. Any type of traction from them can also lead to your performance for your podcast. So definitely encourage your guests to share your podcast, to say, hey, I was on Current Talk podcast, definitely check it out. That's just more eyeballs, that's more traction to your podcast, to kind of get more viewers on. You can network with other podcasts if you can. Join Facebook groups. I know me and Faith are a part of a lot of different podcasting Facebook groups, not just to network, but to learn new skills that we didn't know prior about the podcasting world, and where you can take your podcast, and just so many different podcasters that do so many different content. So definitely network if you can. Be active in your online communities, group chats, Facebook groups, etc. And don't be afraid to self-promote. I know it's very, very hard when you're starting something creative to really broadcast to the world like, hey, I have a podcast, you should check it out. But I'm telling you guys, at the end of the day, you have to be your own biggest cheerleader if you want anything to go anywhere. The biggest thing I like about Current Talk specifically is that it's very inclusive, and it's not just me at the end of the day, me and Faith promoting it, it's our community. And because of our supportive community, we're able to grow and launch it. So definitely when you're starting out, put it out there. If it's received, great. If not, just keep going. All right, so we are coming down to a bit of the end of the presentation, but I just want to leave you guys with just some knowledge of why podcasting. So you've got all of the 6 steps to learning how to start a podcast. You're ready to go. So why in general should you start a podcast? So podcasts are a really great way to build a genuine connection with your audience, and just overall to build a community. While you can build a community through maybe having a YouTube channel, or also having some sort of blog, or just online social media presence across any other social media network, podcasting is very, I want to say, genuine, in a sense that it's your voice. People are listening to what you have to say, and they are connecting with you via what you believe in and what you think is right. And then instead of having just a, I want to say, structured connection through social media, podcasting allows you to engage with your audience long form, and it's more convenient than posting a blog. People can listen to podcasts while driving, working out, or just doing chores around the house. Every time I leave the house, when I drive to get coffee or to drive to a friend's house, I always have a podcast in the background, listening just to either gain knowledge or to catch up with some of my favorite creators, because you obviously can't watch a YouTube video and drive. It's just more portable that way. There's a lot of unexplored space within the podcasting industry. Podcasting is, I want to say, very new. And if not new, it's very, I want to say, new to the content creation world. There are at least 600 million blogs, 23 million YouTube channels, but there are only about 800,000 podcasts currently right now on Apple Podcasts, and it's still kind of being explored and distributed. And that means for every podcast, there are about 750 blogs and 29 YouTube channels. So it's definitely still new. It's not too late. If this is a sign to you to start a podcast, definitely do it, because it's still a very unexplored space and unexplored type of content creation. So definitely, if you want, you can, but I just wanted to leave you guys with this. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in learning more, I did lead YouTube 101, A Beginner's Guide to Social Media, with fellow intern Zaire Davis. And I'll actually go ahead and right now drop the link to that in the chat. But that is it. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop that in the chat. And that is all I got. Thank you so much. All right, we have one question from Michael Jenkins. Can you comment on any out-of-pocket costs associated with publishing and hosting a podcast? That's a great question. So for publishing and hosting a podcast, when you sign up with your email on Anchor, there's no subscription, no fees. It's a podcast distributor that is free. All you do is sign up with an email, upload your first episode with your cover art, and you can just keep going. And there is no fee to that, but there is a fee to having a editor or a recorder. So Zencastr, there are paid plans, but there is a free version to that. And we have another question from Kat. What about when you can't decide on a podcast topic? So that is a very good question. I would say to starting out, just talk about your lifestyle and just talk about your story. So I remember when me and Faith first started our podcast, we, since we were in our first semester of college, our first few episodes was really just talking about being college students and what our experience were. And our community, because it is mostly college students, grew because of that, because people related to our stories, they're related to where we were at. So definitely, if you can't decide on a topic that's specific, definitely just talk about your lifestyle, your beliefs, and just where you're currently at in life. And then it will build up from there. We have another question from, I'm sorry if I pronounced this wrong, Chidera Chime. Hopefully I said that right. How do you work with a co-host when you're not able to be in the same place at the same time? That is a great question. So all of the pandemic of 2020, since we started our podcast November 2019, so when the pandemic hit about March of 2020, all of our episodes from March of last year to I want to even say going into April of this year were recorded via Zencastr. There's a feature on Zencastr where you can record just the MP3 file with the audio only, but you can still see in live time everyone's video camera, and it records the video as well. So that definitely helped a lot with just getting on a Zencastr call with my co-host Faith. We would schedule out a specific time in our schedule to record and how long it would be. And our episodes are normally about 30 to 40 minutes. So definitely just block out any time you have with your person you want to record with or a guest in your schedule, and get on either a shared FaceTime, or you can use Zencastr as well to record. But it definitely does work out. And if you are not in the same time zone, definitely keep that in mind as well. But for our situation, we were both in Illinois, so that worked out, but definitely keep the timing and the time zone in mind. All right, we have another question from Maria Costin. Is there any research that recommends the ideal length of an average podcast? So I would say, just from me that listens to podcasts literally every day, I typically tune out of a podcast episode at the 30-minute mark. There are podcast episodes that are like hours long, but if that is the case, I'll kind of listen to maybe the first hour one day and the second hour the next day. But I would say, to start out, shoot for 15 to 30 minutes. I think that's enough time to put everything out on the table that you want to talk about, but also keep it engaging, because you want to also keep in mind that these days our attention spans are getting really short. So definitely an ideal length for me would be about 15, 30 minutes. And then Maria also asks, would you recommend a maximum number of guests on one podcast? So in the past, the biggest guests we've had for Current Talk would have to be 4 people. We recorded a episode. It was a collab with another podcast that had 4 co-hosts, and it was really fun. We got to meet and connect with those 4 people that were actually really good friends with to this day. It does work out, because I think on Zencastr you can have a maximum of 8. I think it's either 8 to 10 people recording, but there is no maximum number. I do know there's a limit on Zencastr, but you can have as many people as you want, but also keep in mind with your length and having everyone talk an equal amount. Just keeping that in mind. I would say definitely to start out maybe 2 or 3, including yourself. And then we have another question from Trevor Emerson. how long did it take to build your audience, and how active do you have to be to do so? That is a very good question. So we started our podcast about 2 years ago, and I want to say we really started to get traffic on it about a year in. So last November of 2020 is when we really started to build our international audience. And fortunately, most of it was from my YouTube channel. But I would say at the end of the day, if you're just starting out and you don't have an extra platform like YouTube or a blog to market it, I would definitely highly recommend the use of hashtags when you're posting the teasers, when you're posting just any announcements regarding your podcast, to include hashtags, because hashtags these days is how you can get discovered and kind of build a brand for yourself. So definitely utilize hashtags on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, just to get yourself into the podcast community and let everyone know that you're here, you're serious, and that you have content to share. Okay, I think that is all from the Q&A. I'm going to check the chat box really quick. Okay, Marlene Moyes asks, hi, can you post the link from your YouTube 101? Yes, I will do that right now. And then Stephanie Bilberry posts, do you have any tips for booking guests? Yes, so there's a software called Calendly. I think it's just calendly.com, or if you were to go on Google and search Calendly, it is like a scheduler that you would use if you're like a hairdresser or a barber, but we use it for our podcast. And every time we either want to request to have someone on our podcast, and instead of having the back and forth, hey, are you available on Wednesday? Okay, great. Are you available at 2:30? Instead of having that back and forth, we have blocked out pre-times within our weekly schedule that we're available to record and available to have that time to dedicate to the podcast, and people can just choose, okay, they're available Tuesday at 2:30, and an automatic confirmation email will then send to their email, which will then go directly to their calendar after they accept it. So yes, I will also drop that in the chat as well. But Calendly is definitely a great source for that. I think it's free. I think it's still free. If not, there may be a fee to it, but if there is a fee, it's a very small fee. Okay, Michael Jenkins asks, do you have any thoughts or comments on doing a seasonal podcast that is pre-recorded versus a live podcast that is recorded and released on a regular schedule? I think that's a great idea, because I know specifically for me, being a college student as well as my co-host, we do not do this full time. This is simply a side hobby that we do when we have time. And we do pre-record a lot of our episodes either on the weekends or whenever we're free. But I think both options are fine. I think seasonal would be perfect if you are maybe wanting just to do your podcast during a winter break, during Christmas time, or during the summer. I think that's perfectly fine. But I would say if you want to stay consistent all year round, definitely bulk record your content through the summer or whatever season that you're the most available, just so that the only thing you have to do every week when you want to upload your episode is press the upload button. So definitely either option works. Okay, we have an anonymous attendee. Aside from self-promotion, what are other ways to promote your podcast, connect with your audience? Also, at what point do podcasters typically get brand partnerships? So that is a great question. So I'll start with the first one. What are other ways to promote your podcast, connect with your audience? I would say definitely Instagram. If I were to recommend any of the social medias to promote your podcast, Instagram is my biggest recommendation, just because when I think about it, everyone has an Instagram. Maybe not everyone, but I think for the most part, everyone is on Instagram at some point of the day. That's where I get a lot of my friends' updates on life. And it's just more, I want to say, appeasing and engaging to really just see people's real life updates on anything that they have, that they're working on, that they're up to. So definitely promote your podcast on Instagram. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do not want to promote it all on your personal Instagram, definitely create your own separate Instagram for your podcast, just so it's not scrambled up with any other personal things you have going on. And then use hashtags on your Instagram posts, especially when you're posting your first few posts with any teasers or cover art. Use those hashtags so that outside listeners can find you. And then let's see, podcasters typically get brand partnerships. So for Current Talk, we actually recently were approved to get sponsors on our podcast, and we do have a couple sponsorships sprinkled in a few of our most recent episodes. But I would say when you're at an audience size of about maybe 100 to 150, I think that's when brands really start to see you doing your podcast at a professional level and kind of seeing it as a business, just because I think to a brand, if they see that you have at least 100 people that are committed to listening to your episodes and supporting your podcast, that to them, I think is useful and marketable. So I'd say shoot for 100 people. But for starting out, just definitely work on building your portfolio of episodes so that when brands do reach out to you or they are looking for podcasts to market their brand, you have content to show that you're a podcast that can help them out that way. But very good question. Okay, we have another question from N. Moore. Is the sound quality difference very noticeable if one person has a good mic and the others on the podcast are just using their regular phone or laptop mics? I would say yes. Recording on your phone versus like a studio mic there's a really big question, a really big difference between that. From using my phone to record our first, I want to say couple months into our podcast, it was very noticeable. But I would say if you do have the money to invest into a studio mic that you can easily plug into either your phone or your Mac or wherever your computer you're using to record with, the quality will be 10 times better and just overall will come out better when you upload it as an MP3 file, just so there's no buffering or any other noise cancellations like that. But to start out, an iPhone is perfectly fine. I'll just really make sure that you're in a very quiet, small area when you're recording, just so there's not any noise issues. Okay. All right. Kelly has a question. What are some of the biggest challenges you have had with your podcast, and what actions did you take to work through it? Yes. So I would say one of the biggest things that I've had to work through, especially, and this is something that I'm still working through with just expressing myself on social media, is to not shrivel up and shy down and to just really show what you got. There were a lot of times, especially when we first started our podcast, I went about 6 months in, I was like caring too much about what others thought of what probably didn't matter at all, of starting a podcast, even having a podcast, just because doing podcasting as a college student is not very common. And it's kind of like having a YouTube channel. Like it's something that people kind of overlook a lot, and it kind of has a stereotype to it that's not the best. But I would say for being creative, just one thing I would tell myself 2 years ago is just to do it and don't care what people have to say. Put out what you have. If you have a new episode up, post about it. Don't keep it to yourself, just because after looking at the analytics with my co-host, we really do at the end of the day have a really big, broad, diverse community that we are producing content for, that look forward to our episodes. So that at the end of the day is what fuels me to just not care what people think and to just keep going, because anything you do that's creative is going to have that type of stereotype of like, why are you starting this, why are you doing this, is it for a specific reason? And at the end of the day, it's because I want to, and I want to have something that's for me, that I can do for myself, and that I can look back on into the future and have like my own project that I can work on for myself. So that is definitely the biggest challenge that I have come in contact with and still come in contact with today. But I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. And I'm so happy and grateful that I have this opportunity to do this podcast. And okay, we have another question from Marlene. Any mic recommendations? So I know Blue Yeti mics are a great investment. I know they are on the pricier side. I think they're like 200, $300, but I think it's a good investment. I would say when you're maybe 2 or 3 years in to doing podcasting and you have built up an audience to broadcast to, definitely invest. Blue Yeti, great option. And then if you were to go on Amazon or Best Buy and you were just to search up studio mics, a lot of good affordable options will come up there. But yeah, I love my Blue Yeti mic. I even use that a lot when I do, sometimes on my YouTube channel, I do voiceovers, or if I'm recording a video and I just don't want to be on camera and I just want to talk through what's going on, I turn on that mic, plug it into my computer. I say, hello, everyone, I'm back, but I'm not on the camera, and I just still produce content that way. But yes, definitely love the Blue Yeti mic. It is a big investment, but if you were to buy it, you would not regret it. Yes, I only paid $80 for, yeah, they are expensive, but there are cheaper alternatives for that. And then thank you so much, Michael. That is a great recommendation for microphones. But yeah, if no one has any other questions, I'm going to drop all of the stuff in the chat that I said I would, but still haven't done yet. But if you have any more questions, feel free to keep asking. But that is all I got. Thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Cameryn. I learned so much. I'm ready to start my podcast and my YouTube channel. And I have my blackout Yeti mic right here. So I just wanted to let everybody know that we will send the deck out and we'll send the recording of this session today. Thank you so much for joining. And again, feel free to reach out to us. Again, thank you, Cameryn. Take care, everybody. You can have the rest of your lunch break back. Be well.